Fabulous. Well, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to give Kitty a few moments to introduce herself to everyone who doesn't already know her, and then I will initiate the screen share. Have a great time, everyone.
Thank you, Eileen. Am I on?
You're ready.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate you coming to listen to my story. Just to give you a little bit of background, I was born in Casablanca, Morocco. I have a French mother and a British father, and I emigrated to the United States in 1964 to obtain a master's degree at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. Along the way, I've published 11 cookbooks. This particular one is number 11. My first memoir, Minty and Minarets, a banquet of Moroccan memory, centered around a Riyadh Moroccan home south of Casablanca, won a Gourmet World Cookbook Award, and the award-winning Cooking at Casbah recipes from my Moroccan kitchen went through 10 printings, as well as the Scent of Orange Blossom Sephardic cuisine from Morocco, which I co-authored with a friend of mine who lives in Fez. So my career as an instructor, tour leader, food writer, public speaker spans more than 30 years. Bittersweet, my latest book, which I'm going to talk to you about, a wartime journal and heirloom recipes from occupied France, took 3 years to complete. And my late husband was my food photographer. Owen Morse did all the food photography. And you can see more of my activities on my website, kittymorse.com. The book I'm talking about today is very close. I can't help this. I'm very sorry. Very close to my heart. The impetus came after watching C-SPAN. Strangely enough, it's a channel I hardly ever watched. But on January 27th, 3 years ago, 2021, I happened to be scrolling through the TV and I fell upon C-SPAN. And the gentleman standing in front of the crematoria at Auschwitz. His name is Marian Tursky. You're probably familiar with him, and I was not. I Googled him and found out he is a survivor, and he has spent his life telling the story of the Holocaust. But what struck me, of course, was where he was in front of the ovens, where eventually my great-grandmother disappeared. And at the end of the talk, he mentioned we should have an 11th commandment. And I thought, I mean, it was so out of the realm of my life and my background. And I was fascinated. He said we should have an 11th commandment. We should not remain indifferent. And that really, really struck me. Because around the same time, my mother had died in 2018. She lived in Oceanside, and she died leaving behind a little black suitcase hidden in her closet. I knew about the black suitcase, and I'm calling it in French la petite valise because my relative, the whole story is in French actually, but I translated all the documents for my book, and I knew there was a petite valise, but I had never opened it. I brought it from her home to mine, and I put it on my shelf about 2 or 3 years previous to the 2021, and I thought, well, I'll open it when I need to. I think there are family documents in there, but I don't need to see what's inside, and I put it away. And after I heard Marian Tursky, I thought, oh, maybe this is a good reason. It was the beginning of COVID. I was kind of thinking of a project, but certainly not another cookbook. And everything kind of fell into place. So here I go to my own closet, take the suitcase down, put it on my Moroccan rug in our bedroom, and you can read all about that in the introduction. And this is what I actually, if you could put the previous slide on the book cover, please. Yeah. So this is the book cover. This is La Petite Valise, exactly as I still have it in my own home. And the cherries are now my my relatives lived in Alsace-Lorraine in eastern France, 2 hours south of Strasbourg, next to Germany. So, you know, Alsace, if you're familiar with it, is really half German, half French. It depends who won what war. But I put the cherries in there because the cherry is an iconic fruit of Alsace, where you can get kirsch as well as champagne. But that's next, please. And a press picture I took, or I had taken for me, of what I found in La Petite Valise. You see a picture here of my great-grandmother, after whom I am named. My mother named me after her, and I knew about her, but I really never really delved into it, because you probably, some of you understand and know that Holocaust survivors or descendants or relatives never talk about this to their next generation, like to me and my nieces and nephews. I mean, I discovered all this, of course, after opening La Petite Valise. So here is Blanche, and you'll see her more in her Alsatian costume. If you have been to Alsace, you can recognize the national costume with a huge black bow in her hair. So she was born in Alsace, in the French Alsace, which eventually became German again. I also found my great-grandfather's war journal. Prosper Lévy-Névarque, who was married to Blanche, was an army surgeon in World War I. And he did the Battle of Verdun. And I happened to go to Verdun last May, and it was quite an experience. You'll see the interior of his journal. Also, as a treasure, extra added treasure, which really, that's what got me going, 2 little books, like filled with Blanche's handwritten recipes, family recipes. And I mean, you know, I had written 10 books, cookbooks before. I'm faced with, oh no, I can't do number 11, but of course I did. And with great help from many people, including my husband, who passed away 4 days before the book was published. Anyway, among the documents, which I will show you later, also postcards, Nazi era postcards and family photos. Next, please. This map shows the area of Alsace-Lorraine. We see Strasbourg, Nancy, Colmar, and all these areas that were actually very, very they were always taken over by the Germans, or they were conquered by the Germans, or the French reconquered the area. So really, they speak a dialect that has many German words. Their food will remind you of some German dishes. And Colmar is one of the main areas. I'm sure many of you have been. Another one, Chalon-sur-Marne, is where my mother was born. And it has been renamed since the year 2000, Chalon-en-Champagne, because it is the heart of the Champagne region. Next, please. And voila, my great-grandmother Blanche Lévy-Névarque, who was born in Bischwiller in Alsace, closer to Strasbourg, and who I do not believe she spoke German, but her daughter did. Anyway, they lived maybe 50 kilometers from the German border. But look at this beautiful costume. This is Blanche during La Belle Époque. She was born in 1867, I believe, and lived in Chalon, you know, a bourgeoise. Obviously, she had the means to entertain and to cook and to travel within France. She was a child of La Belle Époque, if you're familiar with that era of France in the 1890s. Literally, Paris was the center of the universe, and I'm not bragging, but everything new and exciting in food and art and food and architecture. I mean, the Eiffel Tower went up at that time, and 2 huge expositions, world expositions, so that the French could show off their new the new era that was beginning. And so she was a child of La Belle Époque. If you've seen the movie Midnight in Paris, La Belle Époque, you probably can recall. Next, please. The back of the photo is interesting to me. My mother wrote Blanche Lévy-Némarque en costume, in Alsatian costume. It was taken in Hagenau. Hagenau at the time was in Germany. So she went back and forth across the border to Germany to have her photo taken. Next, please. Her parents, Michel and Bertie Newmark, they probably were Polish or German. They came from over the border anyway. Founded a butcher shop in Châlons-en-Champagne, Châlons-sur-Marne, and he supplied meat to the armies of Napoleon, because near Châlons there is a huge military camp, which I happened to see last May, called Mourmelon-le-Grand, and Napoleon founded it to base his armies closer to the German border. Next, please. And voila, the Boucherie Némarque, which is now, well, you'll see. But that's a fabulous picture that they gave me when I went to Châlons, because I was in Châlons in May. I will tell you more. Next, please. And there we are, my great-great-grandfather in front of his butcher shop. Next, please. This gentleman took me under his wing. I met him over the internet while I was doing research on Châlons-en-Champagne. I mean, I had to research everything because my mother had told me not very much except Châlons, and there was a park and a couple people. But this gentleman is a historian of Châlons-en-Champagne. He publishes a magazine, Le Petit Catalonia, because Châlons has been a camp since Roman times. It's a long history I won't go into. It's a very historic area. And he publishes this Catalonia. He was very excited and pleased, and so was I. He invited me to Châlons last May to give a talk at the public library in Châlons-sur-Marne in French, which I did. And so when I got to Châlons with my niece, I could never have taken that trip on my own, I tell you. He took us under his wing and drove us around and had done research and introduced us to the people we needed to see. Next, please. He also published in French Le Journal de Prosper, because I'm thrilled to have the original in French in France, and he's selling it over the web. And he gave it a wonderful title, Aigre doux, which means bittersweet. I think it's great in French. So it's available in France from his site. Next, please. This map of 1907, I believe, Châlons-sur-Marne, I found on Etsy. You find all sorts of weird things on Etsy. I think someone is ripping out all maps and selling them on Etsy, which was great. But anyway, Châlons-sur-Marne in 1907 has not changed very much. And from this map, I was able, in Châlons in May, to see most of the sites that I needed to see. Next, please. Next, please. Oops. Oh, okay. So I get to Châlons after numerous adventures in Paris, which is absolutely overcrowded. But we got there by train, and I found a very nice B&B in the heart of Châlons, across the street from my great-grandparents' butcher shop. And this is a young chef there. It was wonderful. It was very difficult to find a place to stay. Châlons is a tiny place, and there's not many hotels. Next, please. The entrance to Châlons is marked by an Arc de Triomphe. And what's funny about this one is that it was created for Marie Antoinette when she came from Germany to marry Louis XVI. And you probably saw the series on PBS. Anyway, so the Arch of Triumph is decorated on this side. But if you go to the other side, it's blank, because Marie Antoinette went into France, but she never came out. So they didn't sculpt the other side. That's the entrance to Châlons. Next, please. One of my great-grandfather's houses still stands. It had another name, but this is Allée Paul Doumer, right in the center of Châlons, and I don't know who is in there. Of course, all the houses they were kicked out of during the war, and they were requisitions. I have no idea. I mean, and we don't have any stake in it. But next one, please. I do have a painting that I have in my bedroom of my mother in the background, in the backyard of this house on Châlons-sur-Marne. It's quite a substantial house on one of the main streets. Next, please. This is interesting. The gentleman who took us around, his name is Bruno. So Bruno said, "Did you look at the chimney of your great grandfather's house?" And I said, "No, not really." So he made me look up, and they are the initials Lévin et Marc, their initials, their house, which they had built by a very famous architect in the 1920s, I believe. Next, please. And another house they lived in, you see, very classic. I mean, grande bourgeoisie of Chalon-sur-Marne, and that's where he was the family doctor, the town surgeon, and I got to see the clinics where he practiced and the houses where he lived, and it was quite moving. Next, please. This is the painting I was telling you about, of that doorway with that aquarelle, that watercolor, and on the back my mother had a note. And again, I'm discovering this practically as you are, but 3 years ago there's a note on the back that said it was painting before World War I by a young soldier who went to war and died. And I have this lovely painting here. Next. My Blanche's uncle, I mean, one of the astounding things to me was that my roots are really, really quite deep in Alsace-Lorraine. Another gentleman, this is a great uncle, who was a very famous economist, Alfred Nemark. He's in the Encyclopedia Judaica and many other publications. He was quite well known at the time. Next. During my time in Chalon, Bruno took us to the mayor's office, and I'll show you a few pictures later, but they were very excited at the mayor's office to show me this, that they had just put up a letter thanking the American liberators of Chalon-sur-Marne in World War II. So for this book, I had to go World War I and World War II. It gets a bit confusing, but this is World War II, and it's a letter of thanks to the unknown American soldier. They were absolutely intent on showing me this. Next, please. Inside the mayor's office, sitting on one of these chairs, this is the room in which Blanche and Prosper were married. Things don't change in France. When you have a mayor's office that's 200 years old, you keep it. And all of a sudden, here I was sitting in the mayor's office, and my great-grandparents were probably married in this chair, because in France, first you go to the mayor's office before you do anything else. Next. I also, thanks to Bruno, he found the tomb of my great-grandparents in the Chalon-sur-Marne. I keep calling it Marne, but they kept reminding me, en Champagne, en Champagne, en Champagne. So forgive me. Interestingly, one side is in French and one side is in Hebrew. And this is the great-grandparents' tomb. Next, please. Next to that tomb was a little blank space with a tiny tombstone I could barely make out. So I did, and I saw the name Fanelli on this. And Fanelli was the sister of my grandmother who died in infancy. And the only time I had heard the name Fanelli out of my mother's mouth is one day I walked into her office and she needed a password, and she had a password that said Fanelli. And I said, "Maman, that is such a beautiful name. Where did you get it?" "Ah," she said, "somebody I knew a long time ago." And it was her aunt who died in infancy. Yeah, so this is a blank tomb because I asked Bruno, and he said, "Oh, they purchased the tomb spaces in perpetuity, so there's room for more." But obviously Blanche and Prosper are not there because they died in the Holocaust, and so did many others. Next, please. One of the gentlemen, I gave a talk, and I'll show you in a minute, but said, "Well, would you like to see the synagogue in Chalon?" And I said, "Sure," because all my family really is they don't practice. They're secular Jews, and they also don't keep a kosher kitchen, but they maintain tradition. And so he took me to the mosque in Chalon. It's very small, you will see, but it's so Moroccan looking, so Middle East. It's not North African. I'm not going to say Middle East, it's North African. He said, yes, it was patterned after a North African synagogue. By the way, in Morocco, The synagogues are being rehabbed and restored, and there are many beautiful synagogues now in Morocco. Next. So inside the synagogue, a menorah. I know it's not a menorah. I'm sorry, I forgot the real name for this. So this is the altar and the menorah. Next, please. And my guide, Bruno, and the gentleman who takes care of the synagogue said, come and see this, because this was given by a great uncle in 1864 in the memory of his mother, born Henriette Lyon. So all the implements in this synagogue were given by relatives as far back as 1864. Next. This as well. Offered by Moïse Alfred. So Alfred Nemarque, his first name was Moïse. Temple de Chalon, in souvenir of his mother, Henriette Lyon. Next. I'm including this because I found it quite interesting and intriguing that in French synagogues, they offer a prayer to the French Republic. Next. We're inside the library now where I gave my talk. 100 people came, locals, to hear my talk, which I gave in French. So here it says, ma chance, my luck is to be born at Chalon-sur-Marne. Next. But this is, they call it médiathèque now, no longer bibliothèque, médiathèque, because it's all electronic and, well, you know more about this than I do, I'm sure. Your kids do. But it's called Georges Pompidou. Next. So here is my great-grandfather's war journal that I found in the suitcase, in a little booklet, a free booklet that the pharmaceutical companies give out to doctors, because there was no paper. Remember, he was writing this in 1940. And in this, he chronicles the advance of the Germans from April to December 1940. And I started to read it, and I could not believe my eyes, or my ears, or my soul. Also inside the suitcase, next please. Inside the suitcase, just to precede this, you'll see the writing is like a spider's web, but my mother in 1982 had transcribed the whole thing on paper that I could read. It was all typed. She never told me about it. So I didn't have to decipher Prosper's journal. My mother had done it for me. The picture of Blanche, my grandmother Suzanne, and her sister. Next. You see, they were, as you know, I know you do, but a family. They laughed, they entertained, they danced, and here they're at home in their living room in Chalon-sur-Marne. Next, at one point in his career, well, and these are cousins, well, this is my grandmother, Suzanne, and her sister, and I don't know, these disappeared, and I don't know quite who they are. Next. Blanche again, I think it's a beautiful picture of Blanche. Next. And Blanche in her 80s. So this is towards the end of her life, closer to World War II. This is my mother, Nicole, and my aunt, Martine, and this is Prosper. Now, Nicole and, well, Nicole, my mother was born in Chalon-sur-Marne, and my aunt was born in Morocco. Next, please, I'll tell you why in a bit. Prosper, in his military uniform, remember, he was an army sergeant, very well respected, very well known. He took care of the town of Chalon-sur-Marne. Next. I'm including this to be a very interesting picture because it's the Taxi de la Marne, the taxis of the Marne. It's a very, very famous episode in French history. And because at one point of the Battle of Verdun, there were not enough soldiers. This is World War I. There were not enough military soldiers to defend the Verdun battlefields. It was the bloodiest battle in the world up to that time. There were as many casualties on the German side as there were on the French. So the French needed to replenish their troops, but they had no means of doing it. So the government requisitioned the taxis in Paris. I think about a couple of thousands of taxis when there was from the 5th to the 12th of September 1914. Each taxi carried 5 soldiers, 4 in the back and 1 next to the driver, and off they went from Paris to the battlefield of Verdun. And I read some accounts, and they say very proudly, the government reimbursed all the taxis what they were due. Next, please. Prosper here, with his back to us, was decorated with the médaille. Oh my goodness, hang on, I'm having a blank. I'm sorry, the big metal in front. Let's see what La Croix. Légion d'honneur. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I had a senior moment. I have many of those. So the Légion d'honneur, he obtained it twice. And on this battlefield that Mourmelon that I was talking about, it's Maréchal Pétain, who is not general yet, not a traitor yet, but he gave my great-grandfather the Légion d'honneur. Next. Now at Verdun, I took this picture. I'm not going to read it, but the Battle of Verdun, what purpose did it serve? I am wondering. It was so traumatic. They left it practically as it was. And so you walk, next, please. So the approach to Verdun, it goes on for miles and miles and miles and miles. And they left the holes, the bombs, the bomb holes are there, the mine holes are there, and everything was destroyed. So this mark, there was a house over here, the baker over here. It was just very, very moving. Next. Yeah, so here are the battlefields, pretty empty, and strangely enough, I shouldn't say funny, it's not funny. All we met when we were there were German students and the German teachers who come across the border regularly to teach their students what happened in Verdun. And you see little stones picking, those are places, people's homes. Next, please. Blacksmith. Next, please. I took this, the Canon Miracle, because at that time the cannons were pulled by horses. And they were so excited to have the cannon that they call it the Canon Miracle, but they still have to have it pulled by horses. This is in the memorial building for Verdun, which is very good, very well done. Next. My great-grandfather's military uniform, he was a doctor. My great-grandmother was a volunteer nurse. I thought, interesting, that's probably what the kind of clothes they wore. Next. The Memorial de Verdun, very, very moving. Next. Again, I took this because these are the medical implements that he used when he was on the battlefield or off the battlefield. Next. You want a hand, you want something, I mean, looks pretty primitive, but they had those for the wounded. Next. My grandmother's name was Suzanne Rosalie. Now, Suzanne grew up in Châlons-en-Champagne, and she was a very accomplished young woman. She was an accomplished pianist, a linguist. She played bridge. She could have been a bridge, a champion bridge player, but she led the life of a well-off, I'm not saying wealthy, but well-off young lady of the time. So she commuted to Paris regularly to take piano lessons with a very well-known composer. And she was she took part in all the cultural events of the day, whether they were in Châlons-en-Champagne or in Paris. Next. My mother and her cousin, Jacques, of whom I'll talk later, standing in front of a picture of Le Jard. Le Jard is a garden in Châlons-en-Champagne, Le Jard. This is my mother, about 3 years old. Next. And here I am in front of Le Jard, where my mother used to walk and play and enjoy the botanic, the numerous trees, and it's a beautiful botanic garden. Next. Again, Le Jard, water and swans. See, my mother, I never heard this from my mother. I had to go there to find out. Next. Bruno Malte, my guide, found this picture in the archives in Châlons-en-Champagne. He was very thrilled to show me, this is my great aunt. This is Blanche's other daughter, Annie, who lived in a different town called Rosières-aux-Salines. I will tell you more later. Next. Rosières-aux-Salines. Salines means that they were salt mines. Napoleon III dug salt mines over there, but what it is now is kind of interesting. It's a really horsey town. Horses, stables. Napoleon founded the stables, Napoleon III. So people come from all over the world to this teeny place. There's only 2,000 people who live there to train. And it's a village fleuri because in France they compete. Flowered, blooming village. Next. They were waiting for me in Chalon. And in Rosières, so the journalist came out and the TV came out and the radio came out. And I don't think they ever had an American woman with French documents coming back to Chalon saying, could be yours. Next. So this is the mayor of Rosières-aux-Salines, and I had trouble finding this gentleman, but he eventually came through. He says, Madame, come here on Wednesday at 11. And I was in Chalon, and I said, yes, sir. I was looking for him and wanted to go to Rosières because in Prosper's journal, where he chronicles the advance of the Germans and the bombings, they had to move from Chalon to Nancy. And when Nancy was bombed, they moved to Rosières because their daughter Annie lived in Rosières. And in his journal, he mentions, and if you have the book or you will see the journal is, I translated it for the book. So the journal is really part of my cookbook, introduction and the journal, and then the recipes. But in his journal, Prosper mentions that they had to flee Nancy to go to Rosières because Nancy was being bombed. And their daughter Annie said, come to Rosières because I know two ladies who have a tunnel where they save the champagne and the wine, and she's sheltering people from the whole town. Next, please. The mayor's office, République Française. Next, please. In the mayor's office, they were waiting for me with flowers, which I've never been treated that way before. First thing first, in France, we go to the office and we have some goodies and, of course, some champagne. Next. This is the house that Prosper mentions in his journal and where he was going to go hide from the Germans who were bombing Nancy. And I absolutely wanted to see this house. It was very difficult to find, but the mayor did, and we walked up to it. It was locked. And then all of a sudden, a gentleman comes running up. He says to the mayor, are you looking for me? And the mayor says, yes, I've been waiting for you. I've been wanting to talk to you for 2 weeks. And he tells him the story. So the guy opens the door. Next, please. And I am in the garden where Prosper spent time in this tunnel, sheltering from the Germans in Nancy. Next, please. And in my book, one of the recipes, because he says in his journal, I was in the tunnel, it was getting very noisy, there were all the kids, there was the priest there were nuns, there was everybody from the village in this tunnel hiding. So he steps out, and he says so in his journal, he steps out, he says, I have to go out for a smoke. And he says, when I came out, the Granderie sisters, Granderie were the two ladies who owned this house and this tunnel, served me a rabbit stew, un civet de lapin, which is in French, I mean, it's a classic dish made with white wine or red or champagne, un civet de lapin. So he didn't give the recipe, but that's the one recipe that he mentions. And so, of course, in my journal, in my book, I have a recipe for the civet de lapin. I was sitting in the same place where he probably sat to eat the civet de lapin and smoke his cigarette. And if you don't think that I just turned into a puddle there, well, it was very emotional. Next, please. And then this gentleman who owns the house or rents it, he says, wait, I have something else to show you. And the mayor hadn't even seen it. He says, look, this is another, it's a well where they also hid. He says, I can't let you go down there now because it's filled with water. Next. My aunt Annie, the daughter of Prosper and Blanche in Chalon. Her name was Annie. She was married to a gentleman, a notary called Fernand, who must have made a very, very good living because this is their house in before World War II. And it's now 3 apartments. I got to see that too. Next. At the cemetery in Rosières, this mayor that I just showed you was very pleased, I should say, to show me a new plaque that they put up at the cemetery. And here are my relatives, Fernand and Annie née Lévy and Fernand Cerf. They are two, well, this is Annie, my great aunt. This is all new because in that area of France, I have to say parenthesis, that Alsace-Lorraine was home to about 150,000 Jews. I mean, through the centuries, Jews gathered in Eastern, it was so close to Germany, in northeastern France. It is also at the same time, these days, one of the most anti-Semitic areas of France. I mean, you've seen things in the paper. But what's happening is that the local authorities and historians like Bruno want to bring the history, the story of the Jews and the Holocaust to the fore, to make sure that the present day French Alsacians or whoever remember, recall. And so they're bringing, you know, they're making monuments, like they're putting these plaques up. And they were very excited again to show me this because that's new. Next. This is when they took away the Jews of Rosières, 8 June 1943. Next. There is also a very, very moving memorial outside. So outside Rosières, in my documents in a little suitcase, not only did I find the photocopy of the Holocaust victims who went to Auschwitz, including my great-grandmother, great-grandfather, and cousins and uncles and aunts. I have this paper from the Red Cross. I also have found in the suitcase a letter written by Blanche from this place, Écrouves, which is about half an hour outside Nancy and Rosières. It was a holding tank by the French police, military, soldiers, whatever you call them. They brought in the Jews to Écrouves before they sent them to Drancy, the main camp in Paris, and on their way to Auschwitz. And my great-grandmother Blanche writes a letter from Écrouves here to a friend in Chalon saying, can you please send clothing and food? And my daughter has an earache and it's really terrible. So I could only leave what I had on my back. They wouldn't let us. I tell you, I read this letter and it's just very emotional. Again, I'm so sorry, but that's what it does to me. So this is the memorial of Écrouves. I was bent on going to Écrouves. Next, please. Which is still, this is it. These are some of the barracks. They're more behind. These have been rebuilt. It's now a low security prison. So there were guys there playing boule. And I drove on and drove off, and I had seen what my grandmother probably saw. Next. This map of Nancy, again dating from Etsy, and this is a Nancy that, and it's still there. Promenade La Pépinière. I mean, I could recognize the streets. Statue de Stanislas, if you've been there, Rue Carnot and Place Carnot, they lived around there. I have letters with these addresses. Next, please. Lévin-et-Marc, and here they were in Nancy. So this is a Nazi-sanctioned postcard. This is my mother in Casablanca. Next, please. This is what the Germans let you send to your relatives if they sent it. So we are okay, we are not sick, we haven't been killed, the family is okay, and I love your card from Tangier, we think about you, and this and that, the other. If you did not follow this familial history, you would not be sent. Next. Another one, Nemark in Sèvres. So this is my grandmother in Casablanca again. They had a lot of trouble. Well, the mail was not regular. Next. Now, why Casablanca? Because of this guy, my grandfather, Armand Darmon, who was born in Algeria. He was a Algerian French because his great-grandfather had been awarded French nationality again by Napoleon III. I mean, it's so funny how those two bookend my story. And so his family became French, but he was from Algeria, and he spoke Arabic and Berber and French and German. No, not German, French and Spanish and Latin and Greek. And he ended his career in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, teaching Latin to the nuns. So my grand-père was also a vice consul in Morocco in 1923, where he was under the wing of Maréchal Lyoté. So he first got to Morocco actually in 1907 when Lyoté was establishing the protectorate. Morocco was a French protectorate from 1907 to 1957, and I lived in the 1950s in Morocco through the War of Independence. My grandfather at the time, who had gone to a prestigious school in Paris, l'École des Langues Orientales, it was one of the first in his class, and so he told his professors, well, I want to go to Japan. And they looked at him and said, you're kidding. You speak Berber and Arabic and this and that. You're going back to North Africa. So he went back to Morocco, and he was the liaison between the Berbers, the Glaoui, the king of the Berbers, and the French government. And he went around the Atlas Mountains on horseback. And I went around the Atlas Mountains in a car with my father, couple. Next generation. Next, please. My mother here on the left, back in Châlons-en-Champagne, where she returned every year for les grandes vacances. You know, the French take their holidays, school holidays in the summer, and she always would go back to Châlons and Rosières. And this is the last time, she didn't know it, but this is 1939, the last time she would see her grandparents and go there on holiday. Next, please. While in Morocco, they went up into the Atlas and had tea with the Berbers, Berber chieftains. Next, please. As a young child, she used to go up into the mountains to visit the Glaoui, and my grandfather would have a chat with all these people. And this at around Easter time for the school holidays, they would go up there and they had to go on by mule. Next. Now, we're skipping to World War II, and I love to include this flyer because the American landings, Operation Torch, began in Morocco, in Casablanca and beyond. And before the Americans landed, the message from the President of the United States, and it's in French here, and on the back it's in Arabic, it says, don't kill us, don't bomb us, we come here as friends, we're going to liberate you from the Germans, because of course the Nazis were also in Morocco and all the French other colonies and protectorates. However, in Morocco, the Jews were protected because the king, who was also under the thumb of the Vichy government, told them, you will not touch my Jews, these are my Jews, and they will be safe. And so the Jews of Morocco were safe. And my grandmother and grandfather kept saying to Prosper and Blanche in Châlons, come to Morocco, you will be safe. And Prosper said, why should I come? And I know it's a leitmotiv among the French Jews, educated French Jews. Why should I come? I'm a French citizen. I'm a decorated veteran. I'm a doctor. I'm this and I'm that. What can they do to me? Famous last words. Next. Next. Okay. Now, why am I saying Casablanca? Because my father, I mean, this is World War II now. My father got to Morocco as a young RAF. He was not an officer. He was a mechanic for Spitfires. Because when the Spitfires, the planes, were shot down in Europe, they needed to be fixed. But they couldn't send them back to England to be fixed, so they shipped them to Morocco, where they were repaired and fixed and sent back to the European theater. And so my father got to Morocco in 1943. Next. The end of his of the British presence in Morocco, and I still have this. It's kind of fun because I know all these places. It's still in Casablanca. Next. The Union Jack Club was founded, my father was way, way, way at the beginning, and it's now in Casablanca, the British Club or the Churchill Club. Well, I spent many hours at the Churchill Club. Next. My mother, my brother, and me in Casablanca. I was born in Casablanca, so was my brother. But my mother was from Chalon-en-Champagne, and that's why I can, Morocco, I mean, I've written 5 cookbooks on Moroccan cuisine. It's my food. You know, I speak French, and I went to French schools, and I've got my baccalaureate, but I've never really lived in France. I came from Casablanca to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, if you can believe it. Chain migration. Next. My niece and I were back here in Rosières, and this is part of the garden that my mother used to walk in. Very, very beautiful little town. Next. Okay, this is a page of Prosper's journal. Now I can read it, I can decipher it, and it goes day to day, like 30 juillet, 30th of July, éveillé ce matin par rapport. We were awakened this morning by the passage of motorized troops under our windows and on the, not on the Rue du Montet. So all these places still exist, you see. And I would have, of course, read through it and done it myself, but my mother had typed it all out in the 1980s and hidden it in the suitcase. By the way, the origin of the suitcase, we don't know. The suitcase arrived in 1944 at my grandparents' front door in Casablanca with no return address. It was wrapped in butcher paper. Kind of, like you probably, if you had seen it, you put it in the you had no idea. So my grandfather happened to find it and opened it. And as soon as he saw what was inside, he called the family doctor in Casablanca. And the doctor said, you can't show your wife this right now, because she was already so traumatized. Of course, she had learned that the parents had died. I mean, she had learned about the Holocaust and all the relatives. She died. And my grandfather would say her hair turned white overnight. But anyway, the suitcase got to Casablanca. I have no clue who sent it. Probably, I don't know. We don't know. My mother certainly didn't know either. So I have this suitcase, this mysterious suitcase filled with family treasures, and this is one of them. Next. See, the pages are, every little inch is used because they had no paper. And this ends in December 1940. Next. Another of these postcards, you have to follow the Nazi rules or you will not be, this will not be sent. But here is it's a bit more serious, because I wish that we could have dried fruit and conserves and rice and noodles, and it would be nice to have something, because we're really lacking food. Next. Prosper's military pension. Next. And again, from the Légion d'honneur, that's what he got. He was born 20 March 1863. Next. I mean, also put this in here. I found this on the internet, but there are many, many variations. This is actually a Nazi poster warning the French or whoever against the British and the French. And the British had a similar one. It's this animal here, the poulpe, that's wrapped its hands around Europe. And so the British say, be careful. That's how the Germans behave. Next. I found 2 little booklets filled with recipes, and this is one of them. Next. So what we did, my husband created this collage, because these are the handwritten recipes from Blanche that I found, and I have them all. So for the book, for Bittersweet, I translated, obviously. I had to, because I've written 10 cookbooks before, so you have to put the measurements in, but I did everything for the American kitchen. And of course, they're authentic recipes. Most of them I knew. Well, my mother prepared, but she never told me the provenance. And so I found recipes of, yeah, I've had this, I've had this, I've had the other thing. Well, they came from Blanche. Next. This is the sample, beautiful handwriting. Next. Chocolate truffles, my mother's specialty, les truffes au chocolat. And my husband took all the photography. Now, putting this book together took 3 years. Believe me, the research took a good 1.5 years, if not 2. And then the photography took about 6 months. Next. Because I made them all. I include champagne. We went to visit this champagne house outside Chalon-en-Champagne. Barneau. Next. My friend Bruno, my guide, and the champagne maker, and we are having a little bit of champagne too early in the morning, but it was really good. Next. So, crème pâtissière, it's a custard cream you've probably heard of. Bread pudding, that's in the book. Next. Voila, there's my bread pudding. Nice with champagne. Next. So, a Belgian cake. Cruchade de maïs. This is kind of fun. Next picture, please. This is what a cruchade is. I call them cornmeal coins. They're made with polenta, actually. And you make these coins, and then you fry them until they're golden. And it's great fun to make. Even kids can make it. Be careful with the hot oil, but they're quite good. You have to eat them when they're hot, otherwise they turn a bit rubbery. And then I give recipes for various jams. I believe this is marmalade, because Blanche made marmalade. And I do too. Next. Tuile and pain d'épices. There's a story behind pain d'épices. Is a spice cake. Now, every kid who goes to a French school in France, in Morocco, in Guadeloupe, or wherever you want to go, French kids come home from the school at 4 or 5, and then they have a goûter. They have a snack. And usually for the goûter, it's a sweet snack, because you're going to have dinner at 7 or 8. And pain d'épices is absolutely a classic. So if you like spice cake, it's very traditional. Next. And here it is with marmalade. Next. Crêpe. I'm sure you've all had crêpe. So there are all these variations, and I had to pick one, and I made crêpe. Next. Crêpe filled with homemade walnut, chestnut puree and homemade chocolate sauce and whipped cream, and believe me, they are fabulous. And of course, my recipes are quite, I have a reputation for writing recipes that are quite clear. Now, these happen to be long because they're French and they're pastry, but either you can purchase the crêpe, make them 2-3 days more ahead of time, all this, and then assemble them at the last minute. Next. Clafoutis is a classic. It's a pudding of cherries or apples, and I make that all the time. Next, but I didn't know it was Blanche's recipe. So it's an egg custard with cherries, or you can put apples. Very nice. Next. Beignet de Carnaval. Now, in Chalon-en-Champagne, they celebrate Carnival. Not everywhere in France, but in an area. And for that particular occasion, they make beignets, like you have in New Orleans. Next, please. And so here are the beignets de Carnaval. It's a puff pastry that is, well, it's leavened, and they rise, and then you fry them very lightly, and you have beignets, and you go from home to home, and you taste people's beignets, or you eat a dozen beignets, or whatever you do, but it's a tradition. Next. Calouga is one of the best. I recommend. It's a flourless chocolate cake. If you're gonna make any cake, make the Calouga and Blanche's carrot cake. This is a runaway hit. Everybody's writing me saying they make Calouga. What was interesting is I had never heard of Calouga, never heard of that title. I didn't know where it came from. I had to do a lot of research on Calouga. And also, Blanche used almond flour, which is quite intriguing to me to use almond flour. I never used it. So Calouga is a chocolate cake, and I enlisted the help of friends to find the origin. And apparently, it's a flourless chocolate cake that you have on the island of Capri. That's what I was told. Next. Fabulous. Calouga, you make it the day before because it has to become moist and dense, and then I serve it over crème anglaise custard. Believe me, you will love this. Next. Mousse aux kirsch. Now, this happens to be the only kosher recipe in the book. I'm not looking for kosher recipes. Blanche and all the family, they were secular. So, but this happens to be mousse aux kirsch, something that the Alsatians used to prepare for Shabbat. Next. And here it is. So it's rice and an egg. It's a raw egg and cherries. Next. It's a mousse. Okay, pignon. Classic French recipe. And when I tell you the title really means nuns farts, everybody goes, nuns farts, but they don't call it. I say, yes, they do. You go to any French patisserie and you ask for pignon, next, please. And this is what you will get. Fried puff pastry. Now, it's historically based on a story that goes back to the 1400s, where there's a young nun who made a mistake. She was cooking, she made a mistake. She probably dropped some puff pastry in oil and puff. It was called a pignon. Next. Now, Blanche's carrot cake is the other superstar dessert. It's very moist, not at all like an American carrot cake. It's made with almond flour and regular flour and topped with whipped cream or chantilly, because you do not use ice cream on a French cake. And it's delicious. And it's made also with orange juice. You will love it. Make it 2 days ahead and look how well it cuts. Next. This is a strudel of red cabbage, which is very nice and savory and very easy to make. You can make it also the day ahead. I like to make things the day ahead because I hate to be in the kitchen when I have guests. Next. Poulet au Riesling, chicken and Riesling wine. No, actually, I think this is my rabbit stew. I'm sorry, it looks a lot. This is the lapin. Next. This is a rabbit stew. Next. Next. Oh, a crowning dish. My husband and I made this. It took the whole thing for the croquembouche, which is an American, it's a French wedding cake. My mother made this for my wedding cake. It's called a pièce montée or a croquembouche. 100 little puffs. I do use a shape, and they're all filled with cream. And you serve it like this. It's the traditional.
Kitty, I think I lost your audio for a second there.
Uh-oh. Okay, how do I do this? How do I get the audio?
There we go. I have you back now. Sorry.
Okay. So you went through my croquembouche, the French wedding cake that she showed you before, all filled with cream and shaped as a pyramid. And I include this with my mother and her granddaughter who came to visit about 25 years ago. So my mother was teaching Clara how to make croquembouche the family way. Next. My husband is styling one of our dishes. It's a flan. It's a rice flan, very good. But he worked outside with bright light and then discovered that the one in the living room was, we took all these pictures with our iPhone. It's fabulous. So next. A family tradition is, of course, bûche de Noël, a Yule log at Christmas, except that we make it for all occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, super duper anything, you get a bûche if you come to our home. And this is a traditional French bûche with an unbelievable ganache. And I give very straightforward recipes. It's not difficult. It's a jelly roll, except with chocolate. Next. My husband finishing the bûche. Next. Next. Oh, I love to finish off with this. This is a descendant. It's like this. There are descendants of Blanche and Prosper. This is my great nephew in Canada, who is now about 8 years old, but he is using Blanche's must have been found in a suitcase or something, Blanche's egg beater. Next, please. Oh, there we go. So this was the last slide. And if you want to purchase the book, it's from Amazon or any bookstore, or if you like a signed copy, then you have to come through me, because I am the only one who signs copies to send them out. And I thank you so much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Kitty. I'm gonna allow people to drop in the chat.
Okay.
I'll also go on gallery view here. If anyone has a question, wants to use the raise hand function, we can unmute them that way as well.
Okay, great.
We'll give everyone just a moment here if anyone does have a question. Those recipes, by the way, looked amazing. Those photos were, I mean, I'm hungry. I don't know about anyone else.
They really, and they work. I mean, you know, they've been published and they're working. I'm getting very good feedback, but they're very easy to prepare. So I hope you try them.
Hi, Eileen, this is Arnie Gass. I tried to raise my hand, but it didn't work.
All good, Arnie, you have the floor.
Okay, so Kitty,
Yes.
what's not known very much in history, the history of the Jews in North Africa during
Yes.
the occupation by the Germans and the Italians.
Yes.
And
North Africa, Italians in Libya, but
right.
yeah, okay. The French in yeah, okay.
Yeah, and each of the different countries, Algeria and Libya and Morocco, responded differently to the Vichy government, which controlled them. And I think you made a very good point about that. Thank you for reminding us of that particular occupation in which your father played an important part in the liberation of North Africa.
Well, thank you. Well, the Americans did too. This is where the liberation started. And the British, they had camps in, you know, downtown Casablanca, and the airport that I used as a kid, it was an airport for the landings. And then my husband was a Navy dentist, and we were stationed in the late 70s on the same base called Kenitra or Port Lyautey, where the Americans landed north of Casablanca, about 2 hours. Yeah, and the Moroccans have always been very, very close to the Americans. In fact, the Moroccans were the first to recognize the independence of the newly formed United States in 1789, and they're very proud of that. And there is I have the big proclamation, you know, George Washington and the Sultan. So yes, but back to the Jews, there were some concentration camps in Morocco, not necessarily for the Jews, but they put communists in there, and you know, let's say undesirable to them. And what I also like to stress now is the movie Casablanca, which is fantastic. I love that film. It was banned in Morocco until the early 80s. And I mean, I didn't poo-poo it, but I thought, well, this is pure Hollywood. You know, it's great. It's really a cool movie. Well, the more research I did on this and World War II, Casablanca was truly a lot like the movie. It was a hub for spies and all the rejects from Europe. The Jews who were refused entry in Europe ended in Casablanca. My Moroccan, Algerian great-grandmother put them up. One of my Algerian great-grandmother's protégée was Freud's daughter, Sophie Freud. And my mother's cousin, who is now 103, I saw her in May. Her best friend was Sophie Freud. So they came, it was a turning point for Latin America. I have a bunch of Jewish relatives in Venezuela. There was a big thing going on between North Africa, and they needed Spanish-speaking wives. Either they came to get them in Morocco, where Sephardic Jews were living since the, you know, they were kicked out of Spain by the Inquisition. So this is whole very, very fascinating history. And in World War II, that played a part. The Sultan was, you know, a puppet of the Vichy French, but you didn't step on his toes to protect all these people, including the Jews. Any other question? Oh, Jane Cohen, you're here. Oh, Karen. Oh, how fun. Thank you. I can't hear anything. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. I'm not sure if Jane unmuted or anything, but we can still hear you.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Okay, sorry. I just recognized people. No, I mean, if there are no other questions, that's fine. But if you do.
Well, we can give it just another minute. If all of the questions have been answered, I'm super appreciative of the time that you spent with us, and we will have the recording of this available for those who are unable to be here live this evening. Are there any other questions here in the room? Oh, Jane, I think Jane might be unmuting. Jane, did you have a question?
Because I see her as asked to unmute, so her microphone is blocked for me. So is
Oh.
Karen. So is
So
Karen.
yeah, that's because they're on mute.
Ah, d'accord. Okay. Okay. Well, Jane knows the story, and so does Karen. She wrote me up in the San Diego Union, a beautiful article. Thank you, Karen. Thank you again.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for being here. We so appreciate it. This has been a really interesting story to learn about. And Kitty, we look forward to learning from you when your next book comes out.
Oh boy, it's gonna be a long time. The next life, but thank you. If you have any questions, you can always find me on my website, kittymoss.com. I'm doing various events in the area, including a Alsatian tea and an Alsatian dinner. So it can be fun. But thank you so much for attending. And thank you, Eileen, for taking such good care of me. Appreciate
Oh,
it.
my pleasure. It's been awesome working with you.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Good night, Kitty. Good night,
Good night.
Eileen.
Thank you.